Hello, everybody, and welcome back to this edition, this third debate that we're doing here at Schneps Media, PoliticsNY, where we are focusing on the primary that's coming up in August, an unusual time for a primary in the state of New York, but it was all precipitated by the redistricting efforts that went on, which meant that the earlier one did not include the races for state senate in New York and the congressional districts. And so here we are having an August primary and hoping people will get to the polls or send their votes in. Tonight, we're going to be discussing Senate District 33, which is up in the Bronx, all of Riverdale, Fordham, Van Nest, Pelham Parkway, and of course, under the redistricting, that has a changed venue to it. I'm Jane Hanson, and I am here with my associate, the political editor of NY Politics, Steve Witt. Good evening. How are you, Steve?
Good evening. I'm doing good, Jane. Thank you.
Okay. And Steve has the very distinguished role tonight of not only being a co-moderator, but he is the timekeeper. So if people get out of line, he will stop them.
I do a little wave like that. And that means like you get one wave, maybe a second wave, but third wave, it's like,
you're out. Strike number 3.
Although we only have 2 people, I do want to say that, sometimes we have 4 and 5. So if you run a little long, I'm going to be a little more lenient.
His generous spirit goes on, gets bigger as the night goes on.
Right.
So let me give you a little bit of an introduction to the format we're going to use. Each candidate, both of you, will give an opening statement that will last about 2 minutes long. Then there will be a round of questioning by Steve and I. You'll have a minute to respond to that. If either one of you wants to add a comment to what the other has to say, please do. Feel free to jump in at that moment, and you'll be allowed 1 minute to do that. Then, as I said, we're going to have you ask each other a question or maybe even 2, and then we'll wrap things up with a closing statement. Again, that will be 2 minutes worth of time. So allow me to introduce the people that are with us this evening. We have Miguelina Camilo, who is an attorney, and then we have Gustavo Rivera, who is the incumbent, but it's the incumbent not exactly in this district, same numbers, but different. It's a completely different district. So redistricting has, no, it's not.
Not completely, no, ma'am.
Completely same. Okay, got to make sure I have that right, because I must tell you that this redistricting has caused me personally a lot of issues in just trying to figure out what it all is. So thank you for correcting me on that. So let's begin. Our first question really is, or not a first question, let's get to your 2-minute opening statement. So let me start with you, Miguelina.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Good evening, Jane. Good evening, Stephen and Senator Rivera. I'm happy to be here with all of you tonight, and to everyone that's tuning in virtually. I am Miguelina Camilo, and I'm a candidate for State Senate in what is now District 33, which spans from Riverdale to Pelham Parkway. And I started my road to the Senate back in February of 2022, when it was then the District 36 under a draft of the maps that were going to be produced after the census. I am a first-generation immigrant, daughter of a bodega owner, and I worked in that bodega with my father, and I firsthand saw the value of hard work and the importance of an education as a path to a better life. I am the first in my family to go to college and law school, and I've been an attorney now for over 10 years, working throughout the Bronx in family and criminal court matters, where I looked out for the most vulnerable families in our community. I offer a unique perspective to the ongoing troubles in our district, and I am running for office because in my 10 years as an attorney, I have seen people in their most difficult moments and have witnessed how easy it is to be overlooked when there is a lack of learned empathy, one that you only possess by coming from those communities that you serve. Now, as we seek to recover from the pandemic, it has never been more important to have strong voices in Albany, fighting for our families, our communities, and the values that we share as Democrats. And my life has been one of an advocate, a fighter for my clients, and now I want to fight for every single resident of District 33 up in Albany so that we can make sure to have a better quality of life. I have the endorsement of the Bronx Democratic Party and my local electeds, including City Council member Eric Denowitz, Assembly member Jeffrey Denowitz, our Congressman Richie Torres, and our Borough President Vanessa Gibson, who is the first female African-American to hold that role. And they all know me as a community lawyer and someone that it believes in the betterment of the Bronx and working towards that goal in partnership. I have the support of District Council of Carpenters, Uniform Firefighters Association, EMT, many more. And I plan to use that partnership so we can lead impactful change for the betterment of our district, more housing, workforce development, support of our small businesses, and strong schools to set our children on the path to victory. Thank you, Stephen.
Yep, you got the golden wave there. All righty. Let us now go to Senator Rivera.
Good evening, Jane, Stephen, and Ms. Camilo. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. And hello to all of you seeing this virtually. My name is Gustavo Rivera. I'm a state senator for the 33rd District in the Bronx. I've represented this district for the last 11 years, but the district lines, as we talked about before, will change a little bit. It will include about 50% of the district that I currently represent. And if you count some of the neighborhoods that made their way back to the district, like Tracy Towers, Scott Towers, Norwood as well, it will be a district about 70% of which I've represented proudly for over the last decade. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I'm originally from Puerto Rico, got to New York in 1998, moved up to the Bronx in 2000, was a labor organizer, college professor, ran for Senate in 2010, defeating a guy by the name of Pedro Espada, who then served 6 years in federal prison after I defeated him for stealing public money, so not a very good guy. I've been in the Senate for 11 years, and I'm currently the chair of the Health Committee in the Senate, the first time that a person of color or a Bronxite has had that position. And in my time in the Senate, I've been incredibly proud, whether it's my legislative achievements or the work that I've done and my community affairs team has done in those last 7 years. Just in the last couple of years, whether it's bills related to medical debt, related to safe staffing, we finally got that done, whether I've been a leader in stronger rent laws across the state of New York, whether it was after the pandemic on oversights of nursing homes and making sure that we had that they spend enough money on direct patient care. All of those are legislative victories that I've been proud to lead. And on my community affairs team, whether it's the thousands of people that we've kept in their homes over the years, who we've helped to secure jobs for, we've helped them secure legal representation, help them organize against bad landlords. Bottom line is my commitment to public service is the reason I ran in 2010, and I want to continue to do that. So I am looking forward to the conversation we'll have this evening. But most importantly, I am here to ask for your support. If you live in the 33rd District, I want to continue working for you.
Well, thanks to both of you. We can't go anywhere in this conversation without first addressing the issue of how that redistricting affected what happened in terms of endorsements. The Democratic Party is behind Miguelina, and you, Senator, have been were offered an opportunity to run in a different district. You chose not to and stayed here, even though parts of it were still kind of all mixed up in that. Tell me about that. Tell me how that happened and why we've got this kind of chasmatic divide in the Democratic Party now here in this district.
Well, I'll transport you back to 2012 when our former governor, Andrew Cuomo, actually pushed a constitutional amendment down our throats saying that it was going to be an independent redistricting commission. I was one of the few folks that voted against it all the way back in 2012 because I knew it was going to be a mess. I didn't know how messy it was going to get, but obviously we voted for lines. They were thrown out by a judge. And then what happened was that the building that I'm in right now, which is a building in a rent stabilized apartment that I've been living in for 22 years, will now be in a district that is 3/4 in Manhattan, the 31st District, currently represented by Robert Jackson. And so I had to make a tough decision. And the decision that I made, because remember, the district that I am running in, that I'm going to run in, is 2 blocks to my east. So it is the neighborhoods that I've represented for a very long time. And as I said earlier, about 50% of the district I currently represent, including my district office. So for me, that was if I wanted to continue to do this work, and I do, because I still have work to do, I knew that the 33rd was the place to do it. And as far as conversations regarding other districts, it was never really an option. I have a deep connection to this community because I've been serving it for over a decade, and I want to continue to do that. It is true that there are added parts of the district that I've never represented. Certainly, it wasn't by design. I did not ask for them. The special master drew this lines, and then all of a sudden, I find myself representing a whole bunch of folks that I have not represented before. But I will take the time, as I have over the last couple of weeks, to introduce myself to them. And this process that we're going through right now is part of that. So I'm looking forward to representing them as well.
Well, there are party insiders who say that it's because your progressive brand of politics has strayed too far left for their liking. How do you respond to that?
I'd say that it's not radical to want universal health care for people, which is my number one legislative priority. I don't think it's radical to say that we need to have higher taxes on the wealthy, which is something that I've been fighting for my entire time in the state Senate. I don't think it's radical to say that we need to work on criminal justice reforms that actually treat communities of color more fairly. All of those things are things that I've been fighting for my entire tenure. And it is interesting to me that some of the folks who are calling me now too radical, even though I have not changed my tune in 11 years, are folks who have supported me in 2010, 2012, 2014, 2016, 2018, and 2020. So it seems to me that might not necessarily be the case. But ultimately, I serve the communities in my district. That is the reason I first ran for office and the reason I want to continue to do so.
Miguelina, if we could then elaborate on that, give me your take on how this all shook out with the Democratic Party, because they're calling what's happening in this race one of the marquee races in the state. That's kind of a lot of attention to get for it.
I know, and for a first-time candidate that really, took on this venture, knowing that it was a next step for me, someone that has been dedicated to my community, who has represented people as 18B council, who has represented my family, launching my campaign to the state Senate back in February when Senator Alessandra Biaggi vacated the seat. It was an opportunity to have that platform to do the work that I have been doing at another capacity. And it has been extremely confusing for our voters and for our communities who have to grapple with all these changes. And really, they are the victims in all of this. It's not, who's chosen to run for office or who has held a seat that is no longer there. It's really the people that now have to deal with such a big change in election date. And just to correct one point, if I may, we have right now a comprised district known as District 33 that has several sitting senators until January 2023, including Senator Jamal Bailey, who represents currently Tracy Towers. I have to highlight that because that is a big voting block in the district, and he's the current senator there. So imagine the confusion for the voters who have that personal connection to a senator, including those that have been represented by Senator Rivera, are now trying to understand the change. But with all that said, I have been in this race prior to Senator Rivera being the opponent I'm facing, and it was never with that plan that he would be my opponent. When I first started, I had two other people that I was running against, and they have taken on different paths, one running in a different district, one not running at all.
Well, if it's so confusing to the voters, then how on earth do you get them the right message?
Well, it's all about voter contact, and I have been campaigning for months. And, a lot of the campaign work was dealing with a June primary that didn't include my seat, right? So the voters mostly that we're meeting now are saying, I already voted. Why are we voting again in August? But I believe that I have the character, the care, the empathy to really connect with people one-on-one. I have a great team and a lot of support that help do just that, because that's what matters, that every person understands that I'm a real person that cares about them, that cares about their issues, and that actually wants to bring real results to their problems.
But this must have been, for both of you, a rather bizarre and weird situation to be put into, was it not?
A good way to put it, but ultimately, I think what's important to underline here is there is, this is something that this is not a conflict necessarily that any of us wanted. And this is, think about, for example, in the congressional race that's happening right now in the middle of Manhattan, where two long-term incumbents are running against each other. This is a process. The process was a complete mess. Again, I will put it at the feet of the former governor who pushed this constitutional amendment down our throats, as I stated earlier. But ultimately, here is where we are. These are the final lines, and the consideration certainly that I made, for example, when I was considering whether I would run for what I would run for and what I will run again, is who are the folks that I have been serving, and I feel that. And I know that the folks in the 33rd, which is, again, more than half of the folks that I've represented for over a decade, they know me, they recognize the work that my team has consistently done for them, and the legislative work that I do in Albany on behalf of all Bronxites and my district. And so we will continue that conversation, and hopefully I will be here after August 23rd. Would you like to respond to that, Miguelina?
I agree to the point that this wasn't something of our doing. Again, my path to the Senate is very much centered on my life's work. And I hope to be successful August 23rd so I could do just that and continue to serve my community.
Okay, let's talk about the issues, right, Steve?
Yeah, I've got kind of a weird question that you said you were the daughter of a bodega owner, and recently Mr. Alba, I believe in Morningside Heights, was charged with murder after he was confronted behind the bodega. And I don't know where you stand on bail reform. A lot of people think there should be reform to bail reform. And particularly some of these bodegas almost seem like almost sitting ducks at, in certain instances. So I'm wondering where you stood on that case in particular, and if you think that bail reform needs some adjusting in the Senate, because as senators, you would be on the committee to do just that.
Well, first on the Jose Alba case, I want to say that I felt that personally, because having worked in a store with family members, usually what we try to do is have more than one person at the store at a time. And seeing the facts of the case where Mr. Alba was approached behind the counter, I knew immediately that he was in that store by himself. And he was confronted with that situation. And it's already been decided by the district attorney to drop those charges. And I stand by protecting our small businesses. I stand by supporting them. And that is one of my main platform issues, to advocate for our small businesses so that in turn we have a more vibrant economy. With that said, I am an attorney that has practiced in the courts for years. I understand bail being for the specific issue of returning to court. And everyone has a right to have those constitutional protections in court, to have their day in court, to have a speedy trial. And the bail reform that has occurred in Albany and was revisited by our legislatures was an effort to tailor that legislation to meet the needs of the community. And I have to balance that, because I want to be an elected that meets the needs of the community. We are at a time where nationally crime is up, but certainly our constituents, our neighbors in New York are feeling unsafe, are feeling like they need more protection. And that really requires a community response, more community policing, better relationships with law enforcement, and seeking ways to have positive interactions with law enforcement before it ever gets to a situation of arrest or going to court.
Well, go ahead.
So you think that there maybe should be some tweaking to bail reform possibly?
Well, what I understand from, again, bail is to secure your return to court. And what the bail reform sought to do was to have a list of charges where that discretion would not necessarily be in the hands of the judges dealing with that case. Now, I believe discretion is important when someone has a lengthy criminal record or someone has other issues that the court system is not going to be able to handle. I would have arraignments with people and would have less than 24 hours for them to be processed through the court system. And our court systems are overburdened. There's no way for them to have a diagnosis of any mental health needs, to seek any housing if they are in need of shelter. Our system is not doing that. And putting it all on bail reform is not a solution. That one piece of legislation is not going to actually solve, what we have been going throughout this pandemic.
Well, actually, Gustavo, you've been in Albany with the bail reform bills when it was brought in, and I'm looking at a report here that says average bail amounts have risen, not fallen. Data indicates that pre-trial, pre-arrest rates remain nearly identical to the pre and post bail reform. And it doesn't, and there continues to say that there needs to be additional kinds of judicial and prosecutorial accountability. So it doesn't sound like it's working very well.
Well, the first thing I'll say, because I wanted to make sure that I answered this question as well related to Mr. Alba, I believe that the district attorney made the right decision ultimately. That never should have been charged. And even I'm not an attorney and I'm not a district attorney, but it seemed pretty clear to me that that was an issue of self-defense. And I'm glad the district attorney changed his mind on that. So that's the first thing. On second, related to bail reform, let's remember, and Ms. Camilo put her finger on this. Ultimately, bail is supposed to be about bringing people back to court, but let's be clear on why bail reform was necessary. Bail is ultimately a way to criminalize poverty. I mean, let's look at two cases. On one end, you have Khalif Browder, a former constituent of mine, I should say, who spent 3 years in prison for allegedly stealing a backpack, was ultimately let go, spent most of that in solitary confinement, and ultimately committed suicide, again, in the district that I currently represent in his mother's house. Because of the PTSD that he suffered. And the reason he was there is because he did not afford bail. On the other side, you've got Harvey Weinstein, somebody who was obviously an unrepentant predator, but because he was a millionaire, he was able to be in court for less than an hour, go back home. So bail reform was necessary. Now, everybody deserves to feel safe, and I understand that. The fact of the matter is that many of the stories that have been out there, the misinformation that has been out there about many of these cases, point to the fact that bail reform was not involved in many of them. It has become a shorthand for fear mongering on the right, basically saying, as opposed to talking about some of the bigger issues and how to resolve crime that has risen in so many places in the country that have been rises in crime where there has not been bail reform. So bail reform is the shorthand that is used by folks to fear monger when we need to talk about how we get real solutions. So that is what I'm focused on.
Real solutions. All right. Do you have anything else to add to that, Miguelina, when you're talking with what I just talked about on bail reform, about pre-arrest rates remain identical, pre and post bail reform, that the bail has gone up instead of down in terms of money, and that there needs to be additional add-ons to this law to make it more equitable?
Again, just briefly, the legislature is here to tailor legislation to meet the needs of the community. So we have to take note of what's happening and continue to move forward for the betterment of our community.
So how do you feel about Gustavo's ideas for universal health insurance?
Well, I will make it personal here. I will say I grew up with no health insurance. Even as when I had my practice and I was self-employed, I couldn't afford health insurance. So I definitely am one that believes in the importance of having that for our communities. But the question is, how do we get there? And, we've seen before the senator being the health chair, this New York Health Act has languished and it hasn't moved forward. So I cannot speak as to the inner workings of every detail of why the New York Health Act hasn't moved forward. But what I can say is that I do believe in having the best healthcare for the most amount of people. We just have to figure out, how do we do that? How is it funded? And not putting at risk those that already have coverage and already have the ability to have such, what I say, a luxury, and hopefully will be, a right that we can all have one day.
So if I may, so healthcare is a human right. It is something that I believe in, and it is the reason why I introduced the New York Health Act. And I should mention, thank you, Ms. Camilo, for being supportive of the bill, as you stated in your website. Very thankful for that. Because ultimately, I believe that every single person should have healthcare, not as a commodity, but as a right. Now, related to the reasons why I actually disagree with the fact, with the notion that it has languished. The fact is that right now it has more sponsors than it ever has, both in the Assembly and the Senate. But think about this. What we're trying to do is something that is so fundamentally different. We're trying to fundamentally change the way that healthcare is delivered in the state of New York, and by that, anywhere in the country. There's nowhere in the US where this has been done successfully. We're trying to go after entrenched interests like the insurance companies, who obviously do not want to give you healthcare. Insurance is not about giving you healthcare. It is about keeping your money so that they don't have to give you healthcare. We have to change the belief that having health insurance means having the best healthcare means having the best health insurance. That is not accurate. And ultimately, and there are legitimate concerns that some, particularly in public sector unions, have about things that they've been able to achieve over the years with negotiations. And all of these things are very difficult to manage. But ultimately, I believe that we are not only making progress, but I believe that we will get it done in years soon enough. But it is never an easy thing when you're trying to do something that is so fundamental. I'll remind you about marriage equality that I thought was so important to achieve, and I was very proud to vote for it back in 2011. It took over a decade and a half for it to actually get to the floor and be able to pass. I've only had the bill for 6 years, and every year it has picked up momentum, and it will continue to.
Yeah, but it seems like we've been discussing this forever, and there's been so many other things that have gone on in terms of healthcare. I'm not so sure languishing isn't an inappropriate word right now, but I get that you're taking offense with that. I want to know where you guys stand on the notion of gun control, and particularly keeping schools safe.
I certainly believe that we need that needs to happen. I mean, when we're talking about gun violence, we have to have a much broader conversation. First of all, in the state, we passed a series of bills just recently. The governor brought us back for a special session, and there's a few bills that we passed related to whether it was as a direct result of a decision by the Supreme Court to throw out a law that had been in existence for the state of New York for a long time related to concealed carry. So we had to fix that. We had to fix bills. We passed bills related to age of actual being able to purchase a assault weapon, et cetera. But unfortunately, the reality is that a lot of this is going to have to be done at the national level. There's many guns that come into the state of New York that are purchased legally in southern states and then brought to our state.
How do you do that?
What's that?
How do you do that?
Unfortunately, that part needs to be done at the national level. There's a lot that we've done in the state, and I believe that we have, and certainly locally, I will tell you that some of the work that I've done, particularly with violence interrupter programs like BRAG, Bronx Rises Against Gun Violence, which is an amazingly effective organization that responds directly to gun violence in my district and prevents it in my district. I've been incredibly proud to be partnered with them for many years. There's a lot of that we can do, but unfortunately, the national laws that need to be changed to limit the amount of access to weapons in other states is not something that we can change in this state. We're doing as much as we can in this state, and I do believe that the bills that the governor presented to us and that we passed just a couple of weeks ago certainly go a long way towards that. But unfortunately, a lot of this has to do with what happens at the national level, and unless Congress gets its act together, there's so many more of these tragedies that are going to happen.
Miguelina?
Yes, absolutely. I commend the New York legislature for going back and dealing with the issue of gun violence, which is an epidemic really that we're seeing in the city. And touching upon the point of programs like BRAG, I've worked a very long time in youth programming and in mentorship programs, which I think is also a very important part of the discussion. Not only taking a unified stance against violence and working on all levels of government to make sure that we are safe and that we are issuing the strongest legislation against gun violence, but working with our youth, getting to the root of the problem. In Bronx Connect, I was able to work with children or young adults that were going through the system and we're being diverted from jail time by being given an opportunity to take anger management courses, activities in the community. I would teach them, about professional development, and them seeing me and knowing that where I came from and what I had achieved gave them that hope that they could do that too. And I think that's a very necessary part of the work that we hopefully as a future elected, I would get to do.
May I just ask you, I read one as the political editor of Schneps. I remember reading a Bronx Times article. I don't know where it happened, whether it was your district, of a young student that was killed outside the student by a bullet, a stray bullet. And we did a follow-up in the story when they had a memorial at the school. And one of the kids that our reporter actually interviewed said, I got to be honest, I carry a gun. It is a very dangerous neighborhood. I just want to get out of here. And, I'm paraphrasing, but these are the kinds of things these kids are actually dealing with. So one, do you believe there should be school safety agents in the schools? And, that being said, what can be done to kind of curb youth violence? Because we were all young once, and done stuff that, yeah.
I will once again refer to the work that I cannot talk about brag enough. I mean, they're called brag, so they should be bragging about the work that they do, because they work both on preventing gun violence and then responding to it when there is a tragedy that occurs. As far as school safety agents, well, there's certainly a space for school safety agents, but we have to actually think about how we actually pull back for a second. The way that we achieve public safety in communities is by really investing in community services that will give us stability in public safety over the long term. It can't just be about policing. Policing is necessary, but police need to focus on policing. And when we're talking, for example, about safety agents in schools, certainly there's a space for them, but we have to think much more broadly about how we actually achieve public safety. And that means truly funding community services that provide us stability, whether it's the educational funding that I was proud to be able to fight for, the campaign for fiscal equity, which is something that I fought for ever since I was elected back in 2010, and we managed to finally get it done last year. We've gotten record school funding to the city. The city's cutting schools, which is a little nuts to me, but anyway, we managed to get that school funding, whether it's increasing social services, period, whether it's increasing services, mental health services or substance abuse services. Those are the things that we need to do to achieve safety. And as I said, again, public safety agents, there's a role for them, but we need to talk about prevention and not just response to what the things that happen.
And your response, Miguelina?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that on the topic of school safety agents, many of our public schools feel overburdened because they are taking on that extra role of making sure that children are safe, making sure that children are receiving proper referrals if they have any special needs that the school can't meet, that they would need mental health counseling for example. So absolutely, it's not just about funding, it's also allocating the resources in a way that we can better support our schools. So I am in support of such school safety agents because nowadays, as sad as it is, our parents are sending their children to school and they don't know if they're going to be safe. Because of everything that's happening. And I just want to touch back on that point that Stephen made first of young children feeling like, they can't overcome their circumstances if they're within their block, their immediate surroundings. And that is something that I have heard firsthand. And honestly, it has only driven me to create more opportunities for those young people to see people like us, both myself and Senator Rivera, people of color, people that have achieved through education and through opportunity levels where, youth can really hope to aspire to.
I just want to also put in one thing. We talked about universal health and everything. New York State is like a record budget. I think it's more than California. I think it was 220 billion or.
California's bigger, but we're number 2.
Right. And California has 1.5 times more people than New York. It has 35 million, I believe. Right. And a lot of that money came from pandemic federal money that's going to dry up in a year or two. And you're both speaking about stuff we need. Is there any way you think about savings? Is it just spend, spend, spend? Are you fiscally concerned that maybe the state is overspending and that the federal money is going to run dry?
When I think about, I usually think about this, and I think that there's, when I think about it, I think about not spending, but investments. For example, if we're talking about just this year, we expanded Medicaid, the essential plan to cover more people, including new mothers and immigrant communities. And it's one of the things that we're doing to expand coverage to universal healthcare as one thing that is certainly an expense, but it's actually an investment in stability, in health for certain communities, in this case, new mothers. So there's all these sorts, or the spending that we did, which is an investment on the campaign for fiscal equity, as I talked about earlier, as far as education funding, that is an investment in the long-term stability of students' lives, of schools and the communities that they belong in. So a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, expenditures, are really investments. And ultimately, if we don't make these investments, we're going to have to come back and spend to solve the problems that we're not solving by investing in them. And last thing I'll say is that the last 10 years of the prior governor, there was so much, particularly in the public health system, in the Medicaid system and mental health services, that was driven by austerity. And that has only led to, in the pandemic, which we already saw was pretty bad, it made systems that were already weak even weaker at a moment when we needed them the most. So I actually think that a lot of this stuff is about we can't think about them as expenditures. We have to think about them as investments that will give us stability over the long term and will save us money in the long run. Investing in preventative care now saves us from more expensive emergency care down the road, as an example.
Well, of course it does, but you also have to add to that during the pandemic, not only were there a lot of federal funds coming in, but there were also a lot of people who were fleeing the state of New York and who are no longer citizens of New York and no longer paying taxes here. So I'm just curious how you now you got a bigger issue in terms of how to pay for all of this.
Oh, well, but I still think that we still have wealthy people in the state of New York. They're not paying their fair share. As a matter of fact, they only got wealthier. The folks that are leaving, many folks are working class and middle class folks that are kind of squeezed. Those I don't want those folks to leave. Those folks are incredibly important, which is the reason why we need to take the expenditures, the investments in the services that they need, so that they can have stability and continue to be in the state. I have advocated for taxing the wealthy for my entire tenure and will continue to do so. During the pandemic, they actually got wealthier.
Well, what do you consider wealthy? Who's rich? I know you talk about tax the rich more, but what's your guideline of who's rich?
Multimillionaires, madam. Multimillionaires, folks that live in Manhattan, or folks that have pied-a-terres who have second or third apartments in the city. We're not talking about working class folks. Like, for example, I have this conversation with one of my colleagues in Long Island all the time. I said, in comparison to your constituents have like median income of $100,000 or $200,000 a year. The median income of the people I currently represent is about $30,000 a year. I still don't consider them wealthy. And I don't want their tax money. I want the tax money of the real wealthy folks that are the people who got wealthier and wealthier during the pandemic. Millionaires, multimillionaires, billionaires. Those folks need to pay their fair share. And if they did, we would have the money to invest in these services. So again, over the long term, down the line, we don't have to expend in emergencies. We actually have to invest now.
Miguelina, I hope I don't interject. I want to give it, and I hope I say your name right.
Yes, Stephen. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Absolutely, long-term solutions should be the goal when the legislature is thinking of moving forward a budget and moving forward expenditures that have to be centered on real results, right, and allocation. And I always think back to how did our families come here in the 80s and were able to make it, being working class and being able to survive and then provide for their children. My dad sent me to college. I was from there, took student loans to go to law school, and now found myself in a worse situation than they had been. So we have to find a way to really support the families that are in our communities now. And we do have to find a way, I think, of an approach that we don't want to lose our tax base, right? We don't want people to leave New York. New York is the place of the American dream, the melting pot where so many of us come here for better opportunities. And we have to find the approach that would really enable all of us to mutually benefit from that.
Yeah, so I was just saying, you talk about coming from immigrant families and everything. Even as a family, you have to make decisions. Like, well, I only have $100. I have to eat macaroni this week and not steak. So I'm wondering, is there anywhere in the state budget that you could say, hey, we could be a little more fiscally conservative? Maybe we could save here. Is there anywhere that you see that in the state budget?
Well, we actually do that. We actually do that on a pretty regular basis. There are things that if something is not working well, there are places where we can find savings, certainly. But again, we have a different philosophy here in this regard. I believe that these expenditures can be investments, and if we're talking about education, social services, healthcare, these are not expenditures; these are investments. And I think that not investing in stuff for a long time, the austerity of the last decade has only put us in a worse situation.
Yeah, but it hasn't meant that we've got exactly a balanced budget or where everything works perfectly. So, and I'd love to know.
I would never claim perfection, madam. Never do that.
I'd love to know an example of someplace where you have been able to cut it because you.
or
Do you
where
have-
you might see, somewhere that you think, well, maybe we can shade. Like I said, if you come from families of little means, you must know growing up at certain times where your parents said, no, we can't go to the Bronx Zoo this week, we can't get the popcorn or the peanuts, that we can go to the Yankee game, but we have to sit in the bleachers, so I'm just wondering if there's anywhere that you would consider cutting.
Well,
Miguelina, I want to hear from her. I'm sorry, because I don't,
Thank you so much, Stephen. Well, I want to start backwards and say that representation matters here, because having voices of someone from the community, a family who has struggled, getting to Albany, I bring that perspective and I can say, listen, my family found a way to make it work. We need programming. We do need investments. I agree. We need after school programming. We need better support for our small businesses, and all the extra overflow in a budget that maybe is putting money towards other types of development or other types of projects that I would be responsible for making sure that my district, District 33, is getting the services and the resources that it needs. So I would be a voice and then have to work in collaboration with my colleagues to understand what are the needs of their district and where are they seeing that cuts are necessary or cuts can be made. And I do believe that I would bring that as an elected, having worked in collaboration, building coalitions. That is a necessary skill for an elected to have, to be able to work in partnership.
A quick thing that I want to mention, in the budget that we just passed this year, we actually in the state do save for rainy days as well. We actually did do a lot of investing, but we actually put away $5 billion for a rainy day fund. This was just the last budget. So I believe that there's ways to pair bold vision with fiscal responsibility. I don't think that these things are clashing against each other. But ultimately, it is during the budget process. We have done it in the past, and I believe that we will do it in the future, because I do think that this governor is acting very different than the last one. We cannot lead with austerity. If we lead with austerity, we're going to have to take so many. We're just one quick thing. Hospitals, for example, hospitals that are safety net hospitals all across the state have been treated with austerity for the last 10 years, which means that they've had to come back to the state over and over again to ask for handouts. There's ways to restructure Medicaid so that does not happen. There's ways to make loans to them so that they can make capital investments so that they have more stability. There's a lot of things that we can do that are investments. Ultimately, penny wise, pound foolish is how I look at this.
Mm-hmm. Stephen, how about now your favorite part of the debates?
Oh, my favorite part of the debate is you each get to ask each other 2 questions, because I think we have enough time. Yeah, 2 questions. So who wants to go first to ask their opponent?
May I?
Yes, you may.
Yes.
I would ask you, Senator Rivera, do you believe that we should encourage and support young first-time candidates that are pursuing political office?
Absolutely, and I've done that. I've done that in the past myself. I was once a first time candidate in 2010. And I've certainly worked along in the last 10 years to try to encourage other folks to run. Matter of fact, as I remember, the only conversation that we've had before today was when we saw each other at I think it was the Van Nest Neighborhood Alliance. And as I told you then, I certainly welcome this conversation because I believe in democracy, and I sincerely believe that anybody has the right to run. We are having a conversation about the vision that we have, about the work that we've done. In my case, more than 11 years of being a state senator, the legislative achievements and all the things that my community affairs team has done. And it is up to the voters to ultimately make the final decision. I am not entitled to this seat, and I don't believe any of our colleagues are entitled to theirs. It is up to us to convince our constituents that we should be chosen. So certainly, I'm very supportive of folks running if they want to.
So you have a question for Ms. Camilo, Senator Rivera?
Yes. So considering Ms. Camilo, as I'm sure that you're familiar with the IDC, which was this group of breakaway Democrats that kind of partnered up with Republicans And after we were able to succeed in getting rid of them, we were able to pass the Campaign for Fiscal Equity I was talking about earlier, or the Reproductive Health Act, which actually codified Roe into state law, or we're able to raise the minimum wage, or stronger rent laws, or pass paid family leave after the resistance that they put up. So I guess my question to you is, do you regret supporting the IDC when they were in existence?
So I think that's a false statement, because I did not support the IDC since I wasn't involved in politics. I didn't have any type of position as an elected candidate. And I absolutely will say now that I would have joined you in fighting against the IDC, because caucusing, with the Republicans and opposite party is not something that I would ever support or ever do. So want to be very clear that I didn't support the IDC, never have. Again, I'm a first-time candidate. My career path has been one of an attorney.
Okay. Ms.
But you
Camilo,
did,
sorry.
you did do a campaign. Go ahead.
Oh, follow up.
No, follow up, please.
Yeah, there is. I'm saying that because you supported an IDC candidate. You supported them financially. You gave them money. So I guess if that's not support, then.
So if you're speaking about a candidate that maybe became part of the IDC, and I supported them prior to them joining the IDC, that is a very different conversation.
Would you continue to support them would you supported them if you'd known?
No, and I didn't. I didn't support them after, and didn't support them since.
Okay.
Okay, so Ms. Camilo, for Senator Rivera, you have a question.
Well, speaking about financial contributions, I do want to ask about taking money from PACs that are in the health industry, private health industry. Do you think that is in conflict with your position as chair and wanting to push forward the New York Health Act?
No, ma'am. I would say that the good thing about being in the minority for as long as I was, because I was in the Senate for 8 years before I got to the majority, is that I established a reputation for being a straight shooter. And that means at times I certainly clash with folks in power, but that means that there's a respect that I have that is had for me by these folks when, for example, I will tell you that I want to pass the New York Health Act, and I'm committed to that because I believe that healthcare is a human right. There's large private hospitals in the state of New York that are not supportive of that position, but still are supportive of me because they know that they can always come to me. They always know that I am going to be an honest broker. I'm going to tell them when I agree with them and tell them when I don't agree with them. And that is a kind of the reputation that I've built over the 11 years that I've been there, and the support that I've gotten, which I'm incredibly proud of. Certainly, there's a lot of funds in there from a lot of labor unions who I've worked with over the years, whether it's 1199 or the healthcare workers of 1199 or the healthcare workers of the Nurses Association or the Communication Workers of America. Or RWDSU, which department, retail workers and department store workers, etc., or a lot of different folks that have been supporting me over the years. So I believe that the support that I've been able to get as far as donations that I've gotten and the contributions that I've gotten is because these folks understand that I am going to be an honest broker. I am going to tell them when I agree. I'm going to tell them what I disagree. But ultimately, because of the experience that I've had over the last 11 years, they know that they have somebody who will understand the conversations that we have about very complicated healthcare policy. And we're going to get to a better solution, which is why I've been able to pass as many bills as I have, working sometimes with people who are in disagreement with me, but still we get to a final decision and we get to a final.
So I just want to be sure I heard you correctly or incorrectly. You do accept money from these PACs. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am, I do. It is all legal and everything is publicly available. Folks can look at the money that I've been able to receive. But I will tell you this: I am very happy that we're going to be making a transition in 2023 to a public financing system. And the reason why I'm very happy that we're going to make that transition, among many other things, is because the argument can be made regardless of what the actions of a particular elected are. And I certainly have been, I believe that my actions in the last 11 years have spoken for themselves as far as who I am, kind of in public and in private. I'm kind of the same guy, to my benefit or to my detriment. But the argument can be made that because there are certain folks that support a certain candidate, then that means that person is going to take a particular position. I am very much looking forward to moving away from a system moving away from the system that we have right now, and we go towards campaign finance reform system, which I've always supported, so that we can actually have the influence of money be excised, and people can't make the assumption and make the statements sometimes accurate, sometimes not. I believe that we need to move in that direction, and I'm happy that we're going to do that.
Okay, I think we have one more question, don't we? For
Senator Rivera, you can ask Ms. Camilo. I'm really bad on my pronunciation, so please.
You're fine, Stephen. Thank you.
So I guess the question I would have for Ms. Camilo is just to get clarity of you are a resident of Riverdale in the moment. I'm not sure how long you've resided there, because I'd want to get a sense of, and I think it's important for our constituents to know it. How long you've resided there in Riverdale? What are the situations and how you were there? I certainly know that living for 22 years in a rent-stabilized apartment that I'm going to have to give up eventually, unfortunately, because of the district lines, is certainly going to be a pain. But I think that it's important for our constituents to know. So how long have you resided in Riverdale? What is the situation there? And to just speak about the connection that you might have to that community if you only moved there recently.
Okay, so I want to say it's very interesting that you asked me that question when you don't live in the district. And we know that in the redistricting year, you are able to move into the district if you were to be successful. And you have been very clear about, what that means as to your current apartment situation. But regardless, I've lived in Riverdale almost 7 years. I purchased my first home last year, something I was very proud of. And as a professional woman, thank you so much. That was part of my American dream because it's something that my family was able to accomplish. And having the ties not only to living here, but having a community. A lot of my girlfriends who are Latina, who work in government, we live within blocks of each other. We go to the gym at TCR. We go down to the restaurants. Ting Marin, shout out to them. So this is a community where I have lived, I have worked, and I care deeply about my neighbors. And thank you for the question, because there is no reason why we don't need to be candid about those circumstances. And the change in the lines never affected me. I always lived in the district, whether it be 34, 36, 33, if tomorrow's 31, I live in this district and I'm happy to be running for state senate in it.
Yeah, I'm curious, just real quick, and as an Anglo guy, are you Latino or Latinx? And what do you think of the Latinx term?
Honestly, I say Dominicana, but Latina, because I'm from the Dominican Republic.
Senator Rivera?
Oh, I say Latino, but if someone wants to be referred to as Latinx, and if I'm not mistaken, it was queer Latino communities that came up with that particular term. And if somebody wants to be referred to as that, I call them by that or by their name. But for me, Latino is fine.
And just journalistically in the newsroom, we've had arguments because I've had people like, they all have to be called Latinx. I mean, and I'm thinking, no, I Latino or Latina is the way I always knew them. Maybe I'm older. I don't know. So
well, I'm glad that these two cleared up how they feel about it for you, Stephen. But
I know Congressman Torres had a big thing because the Yankees put out Latinx and it upset some people or something.
Oh. Anyway, thank you both. And I think it's time for our closing statements. So if you could each take a couple of minutes and recap for us what your issues, what you're running on, what you hope to accomplish, and give us a good little wrap up of where you hope to be if you are indeed elected. Let's start with you, Miguelina.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this evening. I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to hear about my candidacy and have a discussion on what matters the most. And that is informing our neighbors, our 300 residents of the District 33, of the importance of their vote and of choosing a candidate that is one of you. I am someone who has worked in the community for the benefit of the community, and everyone in this district deserves the same thing that we all want: a safe, affordable home, a means of providing for their families, strong schools that ensure a lifetime of opportunity for our children, a more resilient environment so that we can leave something to our future generations, community response to issues of public safety, and access to better healthcare and government support no matter where you come from. I know what it means to represent on many levels. As a child of immigrants, I represented my parents. As an advocate on the 18B panel, as an attorney, I represented those who otherwise wouldn't have counsel. And while elected office is new to me, representation isn't. I've done it before, I'm doing it now, and I'm looking forward to taking on this new level as your state senator. So the work continues until August 23rd to ensure that every person knows that when they vote for Camilo, they are voting for community.
Thank you very much. Gustavo?
Well, thank you again, both Jane and Stephen and Ms. Camilo for having this conversation this evening. So I've had the pleasure of being the great honor of being the senator for the 33rd district for the last 11 years. Coming on 12. It is not something that I originally sought, but when the person who was here before, Pedro Espada, was disrespectful to the people that he was supposed to represent, over 300,000 working class folks in the Northwest Bronx, it was necessary that someone step up, and I felt the obligation to do it. It was my commitment to public service that did that, that made me take that step, and I was incredibly apprehensive at the time, because I'd never run for anything and I was never thinking about running for anything. But it's been 11 years and it's been the best decision I've ever made, because you have 320,000 folks in the Northwest Bronx and now a whole slew of new folks that I will have the opportunity to represent. And it's been 11 years and I've been incredibly proud to serve. Whether it's becoming the first Latino or the first person of color or Bronxite to be the chair of the health committee, whether it's being the fourth most senior Latino in the entire state legislature, whether it's passing bills around medical debt or safe staffing, being a leader on rent laws, oversight on nursing homes, being part of a conference that finally got the campaign for fiscal equity, or codifying Roe into New York state law. All of these things were things that I was able to work and achieve and lead on in the state Senate. And my community affairs team, which is second to none, has been an incredibly important part of making sure that folks in my district know that they are going to be served and know that they're engaged and that they're going to be listened to and engaged with. So I want to continue that work. I want to continue my work in public service. I'm not done yet. I have a lot of work to do and I want to do it for you. So on August 23rd, I'm asking for your support. Gustavo Rivera, State Senator for the 33rd District. I want to continue working for you. Thank you for your ears this evening.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you, Miguelina Camilo and Gustavo Rivera. And of course, again, back to this notion that August 23rd, an unusual time to be voting, but it is our civic duty to do so, voting for state senators or in your congressional race, whatever it might be. So, Steve, thanks so much. Any last thoughts?
Jane, excellent conversation, and thank you both, Miguelina and Senator Rivera.
And we will see you next time. Another debate coming up tomorrow at 5 p.m. So be there with us. And we'll see you then. I'm Jane Hanson. Thank you so much and have a great evening, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.